Hello there and welcome back to another episode of the Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting. It is great to have you here as ever. For those of you who are new to the show, be it on YouTube or the podcast, welcome. I'm Verity, absolute podcast enthusiast, and I love teaching other people about how to start and run their own podcast. And if you are not new here and this is not your first episode, welcome back. Thank you so much for coming back and joining us for another episode. It's great to have you here. Today's episode, what we're going to be talking about is really finding that sweet spot of how often should you release your podcast episodes. It's a question that I get asked a lot, and so I thought it'd be a really good one to dive into for this episode. So we're always told when it comes to podcasting that consistency is key, but it's really breaking down what that consistency means. It does not mean posting every single day. It does not mean having an episode every single week. It's about having a schedule and sticking to that schedule. There's nothing wrong with changing it every so often if you want to, but it's about meeting a schedule. So if you're saying that you're giving out one monthly podcast episode, that you stick to that and you produce that episode every month. If you do a daily show, then you stick to that daily show, unless, things always happen, for example. But it's about keeping up with that consistency. So it's determining essentially how much time you've got. This is what I so often say to people when they say, how often should I produce episodes? And it's, well, how much time have you got? How long does your production process take? And are you brand new at it? Have you been doing this quite some time? Because all of that is really, really going to depend on how many episodes you can put out there, and also the length of your podcast episodes. So for example, for the Confident CEO podcast, those podcasts last up to an hour long. So therefore, I don't put out as many of them in comparison to the Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting, where roughly speaking, these episodes are 10 to 15 minutes long. So my production time, my creation time is so much less. So I can put out those 2 episodes per. When you're kind of considering how much time you've got as well, it's thinking to yourself that there's no point in dedicating yourself to a schedule that you just can't meet. If you want to put out a daily podcast episode, but you do not have the time to research, record, and produce an episode every single day, then there's no point committing to that schedule, because all that's going to happen is you're going to end up hating your own show. And then you're just going to feel really, really bad and guilty because you're not producing the content that you feel that you should be producing, because that's what you promised to your listeners. It's better to start off with something less frequent, maybe weekly or bi-weekly, and then build up if you want to be doing multiple shows a week or multiple episodes a week or a month, depending on whatever works for you. So as I said, I would first of all urge you to really consider how much time and effort can you dedicate to researching, recording, producing, editing, all the rest of it each episode, because it takes way more time than I think people give the process credit for. And it also depends as well, do you have a team behind you? Are you a one-person show? Are you outsourcing to different people? Do you have a VA? Do you have a whole, YouTube creator team? Do you have a podcast production team? Because that is also going to impact how many episodes that you put out. If you can give some of the work off to other people, or even give some of it off to AI, which we know there are some fantastic AI tools out there now. And I've done reviews of several of them on this podcast and on this channel, so you can have a little look at those, and I've got more of them upcoming as well in the coming months. So the other thing that I would urge you to do is really consider your audience and their preferences. So does your audience actually want a daily episode? Do they want a weekly episode? Do they want a monthly episode? What is it that topic is that you're talking about, and how much content do your listeners actually want on that particular subject? Now, you can go out and you can ask your audience, even if you haven't started your podcast yet. If you're on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, literally whichever social platform you are on, you can ask your audience, hey, I want to start this podcast. This is what the schedule I'm thinking of. Would you like a new episode every week? Would you like one every month? Would you like one daily? And you don't have to go with what you're told, because, as I said, it's your podcast. You've got to love what you're doing. But that might give you an indication that if you were thinking I need to do a daily podcast, but your audience is actually saying, nah, weekly's enough, then maybe you go with that, or maybe you go with twice weekly, or whatever works for you. But you can definitely ask your audience what they prefer, because some people actually feel quite bombarded that sometimes you can put out too much content, and then they either feel that the quality isn't there, or they've just got such a back catalogue of stuff to listen to you from or watch from you, that they actually go into this kind of overwhelm, and they're just not really that interested anymore, because they don't even know where to start with the back catalogue of content that they need to catch up on. But what I would always say is, regardless of your schedule, always think about quality over quantity. The next thing that I would say is a huge factor for you to consider is to look at your competitors and the industry standard for your niche. Now, I'm not saying go and copy what other people are doing, and I'm also not saying go completely the opposite in an attempt to stand out. But what I am saying is, roughly speaking, if the podcast episodes on the topic that you're talking about are around 20 to 30 minutes, that's probably telling you that that is the kind of length that the audience in that niche are expecting from a podcast episode. If they're 2 hours long, then again, maybe that is what the audience is looking for in that niche. If they are short 5-10 minute episodes, again, maybe that's what that audience is looking for in that niche. So I would really urge you to look at your competitors. What are the kind of industry standards in that niche, and see what's working for those? Are they doing short episodes but they're leaving loads of information out? Are they doing really long episodes and they're just repeating themselves? Figure out which are the popular ones, which ones do people go to the most, because as I said, that will give you a really good indication as to a time frame that could well work for you. What I would also suggest you do is to test different frequencies, release frequencies, and gather feedback. So if you're not really sure what you want to do, start off with a weekly episode. I would say that that is probably the kind of standard that most people start with, because it's quite achievable for most people to be able to research, record, and produce a podcast episode per week. And then you might want to try bi-weekly. You might want to then try to go to 2 a week or 3 a week. I would say don't do less than 2 per month, so 1 every 2 weeks, because what you don't want to do is almost be forgotten about and somebody think that you're not doing your podcast anymore. But equally, you don't want to go into overkill unless your podcast works really well as a daily release, which there are a lot of podcasts out there that does work incredibly well for. But what I would say is try out different release frequencies and release schedules. Don't just try them quite haphazardly. Actually have a plan and think to yourself, right, for the next 6 weeks, I'm going to release a weekly episode. For the 6 weeks after that, or however long, I'm going to do bi-weekly episodes, and collect data. Analytics are your best friends when it comes to release schedules, and see, what's happening to your download numbers. Are they increasing? Are they decreasing? Are you getting more listeners in? Is it giving you more time to promote your episodes, for example? So just really have a look at the analytics, because that's going to help you really define the best release schedule for you and for your podcast, and also for your listeners and your audience. So the next question, which relates into release schedules really well, is what is the best day and time to release new podcast episodes? And I firmly believe that there is no good time, and there are probably some purists out there who are going to hate me for that, but I do. Statistically speaking, Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays are the best days to release podcast episodes, and that I can completely understand. Monday, people are going back to work, and there's just stuff going on. Friday, you're getting ready for the weekend, and that is what it is. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays are the best. And Wednesday is the optimal day to release podcast episodes. Wednesday is my release day for The Confident CEO, but for this podcast, I release on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I haven't really seen a difference, to be quite honest with you. Early mornings also tend to be the best time to publish, but, and this is where it comes in with me saying that there is no ideal time, because what you've got to remember is your early morning. So I'm in the UK, my 6 a.m. is not 6 a.m. in Los Angeles, and I know that I've got listeners in Los Angeles. My 6 a.m. is not a 6 a.m. in New York, and again, I know that I've got listeners in New York. So it's remembering to yourself that yes, you can optimize to a point when it comes to timings, but at the same time, nobody is on the same time globally. So depending on your audience, if they are a global audience like mine is for this particular podcast, then you've kind of got to think to yourself that, yes, I set it to go out at Wednesday at 6 a.m., but that's only so that I can wake up and know that the podcast is out there, because I do have, it's something like just over 40% of the audience for this podcast at the time of recording is not based in the UK, which means that around 40% of listeners are not waking up on a Wednesday morning, having that episode, if they've subscribed, straight into their podcast directory and available to listen to. So that's what I mean when I say that there is no perfect time, because we live in a global time zone now and we're not all on the same time zone at all. So in conclusion to this question, what is the ideal frequency for publishing new podcast episodes? I'm going to be really annoying and say that, do you know what? There isn't an ideal frequency, because I'm not going to give you a number, because that is potentially not going to work for you, your show, your niche, your audience. At the end of the day, you've got to produce something that is going to work for those 4 things, but particularly you, because you're the one that is producing your show. So if you want to go for weekly, if you want to go for daily, monthly, whatever it is, go for it. Just have a go. See what it's like, have a test with different things and different schedules until you find a schedule that you are comfortable with. Because what you don't want to do is overcommit, and then you just end up hating your podcast because you're just on this constant production schedule that you just can't keep up with. And equally, you don't want to end up leaving it so long in between that your audience actually forgets about you. So I would say it's finding a balance, but most importantly, it's got to be a schedule that you can keep up with and that you are happy with producing content for. So I hope you found this episode useful. If you're listening, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, like, comment, all of those good things. If you're listening on the podcast, don't forget, if you're listening as a podcast episode, don't forget to give us a 5-star review for the podcast, and then reach out to me with any comments at VeritySongGone on Twitter and Instagram. I love hearing from you all and how these episodes resonate with you and how you find them useful as well. So on that note, I'm going to sign off for today, and I will catch you next episode.